Undertale recently celebrated its 9th anniversary, which is surreal considering 9 years is, well, longer ago than I'd like to think about. The fact that I've stayed invested in Undertale and think about it so much after all these years really speaks to how important it is to me and many other people, as well as how rich it is both as a game and as a text. Undertale never shies away from breaking boundaries when it comes to traditional writing tropes and ideas, and although it doesn't necessarily reinvent the wheel as much as some would claim, it is fascinating enough to, well, dedicate an entire channel to. Welcome viewers, I'm Vivet Veritas, and I wanted to do something special to celebrate this milestone of Undertale's journey. It truly is one of my favourite games, and it would be doing it a disservice to not say something at least. However, forcing myself to make a video rarely goes well, so I only was going to put out a video if I thought of something really special, something that no one had done, or at least something I thought I could do better. Ideas swirled in my head of how to commemorate this anniversary, even if it was many months later that I actually released the video. Then I realized something. Part of what I love about Undertale isn't necessarily everything that's in the game. I'm talking about the things that the game clearly skirts around in a way that draws attention to it more than anything in a very deliberate fashion. I want to highlight perhaps the most important characters of the game itself, Asriel and Kara Dreamer, and what their position as ghosts of the narrative means for Undertale and how we engage with it. The void that arises from this haunting, a paradoxical narrative conflict, is fascinating to me. There's a phrase I'm going to be using a lot in this video, haunting the narrative, so I should probably define what I mean by it. By haunting the narrative, I am talking about how a character's presence greatly affects the current situation we find ourselves in, despite the character themselves being absent. A character doesn't necessarily need to be dead to do so, it is more so like the character should not be here and is possessing the story without moving on. Well, with that set up, it's time for us to venture into the void. Join me, won't you? Now, I'm hardly the first person ever to do an analysis on Kara and Asriel, but I'm the first me to do it, and that's good enough for this channel. However, this means that I have to do some definitions and exploration myself to come to the type of thesis that this channel is made for. So, to open with a very basic question, who are Kara and Asriel? Let's go one at a time. Asriel Dreamer is a funny little goat boy who is caring, a little naive, but ultimately kind. He loved playing with his sibling Kara and having a fun time, often the butt of tricks or jokes. His level of care and kindness even extends to the humans that he worked with Kara to kill, his compassion and love stun-locking these dumb children and getting them killed by said humans. We actually know quite a bit about Asriel, thanks to being able to actually interact with him both in normal and Flowey form, and there's a pretty marked difference between his normal pre-death form and Flowey. Arguments can be made that his difference in attitude can be due to his soulless nature, but I don't think that's the whole story. No, instead I think the differences come from their perspectives. The work you do in the true pacifist route is not for nothing. It changes Asriel's attitudes and perspective through sheer determination. We don't see Flowey after this moment, but I would bet that he would, at least for a while, maintain this thought process and perspective. Asriel's presence in the narrative is a little bit specific since he doesn't haunt it as literally as Kara. Instead, Asriel is broken through his experiences dying and being reborn as Flowey. Flowey initially comes off as this maniacal, grotesque, evil creature that, the more you begin to learn about the tragic surroundings of his existence, come to understand more and more, whether that is through embracing his ideology of killing or being killed in the no mercy route, or through reaching out to him with love and kindness regardless of whether or not he deserves it in the pacifist route. Flowey is hopeless and dreamless, having lost all interest and care for those in the world, and reflects a player you could become if you really did treat Undertale like a game, like the things in it didn't matter. Asriel, on the other hand, was kind and loving when he was alive, and you reignite this within him by refusing to give up in the face of his desire. His desire to play with you, and only you, forever, is born out of this twisted love combining both perspectives of himself and Flowey in a kind of tragic way. He has to come to the realization, ironically through our actions, that Frisk is their own person, and he can't recapture the past. Which brings us nicely to Kara. Much like Azrael, we see Kara twice, pre and post death, and what we know and don't know about them makes that difference really interesting. It almost poses the question of whether there are two entirely different Karas. Is the Kara at the end of the No Mercy route the same Kara that died trying to collect the human souls? Considering what we've talked about regarding Azrael and Flowey, I would be hesitant to say so. They're clearly meant to be comparisons, so I would be more inclined to believe that Kara, who was a human child, probably underwent a similar, if not worse, mental journey after dying and being forced back into the world. The analysis necessary to pry these simultaneously true interpretations and versions of Kara apart from each other is hard to come by and rather difficult, but it's integral to understanding the character properly. Unfortunately, aside from second-hand accounts, there are only a couple of times that we can get a read on their personality, at least while they were alive. The big one is in the videotapes in the True Lab, where we get to observe them having a conversation with Azrael. From what we can tell from the old tapes, we know that Kara was a bit of a trickster with a penchant for teasing their brother with scary faces. They were very determined and weren't afraid to take radical, sometimes dangerous actions to get what they wanted. However, Kara never actually says anything that we can hear, so we're left to only infer what may have happened based on what Azrael says. It's unclear how reliable he actually was when talking about Kara post-fight in the true pacifist route. Azrael was clearly very emotionally attached to Kara, and he might be overcompensating or still not being honest enough considering the circumstances. In a way, the only things we can be sure about Kara is what they say at the end of the No Mercy route when they talk to us directly. We see Kara as an absolute demon in the context of Undertale, wanting absolute power and are fully convinced that you, like them, want all this power too. I think there's a relevant point that people miss about even this aspect of Kara. Kara isn't necessarily about committing violence, though it's certainly the thing that they're most known for considering their violent nature towards the rest of humanity. But they're not doing it for the glee of murder, they're doing it like you would play any video game. You kill all the monsters, all the guys, and you get stronger. That's just how games work. The magic of Undertale is that it feels different. When Kara talks about moving on to the next thing, they really mean that as a philosophy that you carry into another game. Exhaust all of your options, gain all your strength, do not engage with any emotion or theme. Play, kill, move on. Now that we've talked about both Kara and Azrael in detail, it's time to turn our gaze towards the ties that bind them. Their relationship is one of the most important things within Undertale itself, and so understanding it will help us understand more about the game in turn. The interesting thing to analyze here is that there are somewhat two versions of each of these characters, and so I think it's worth talking about the relationship between both sets, as it were. Of course, Kara and Azrael as alive siblings is the most salient pairing, so we'll start there. Kara and Azrael's perspectives bounce off a lot on each other and impact the wider game. Although the monsters have already lost the war, Azrael and his family still love Kara despite them being a human. Kara's aforementioned determination really affects Azrael, who is somewhat meek in comparison. The way that Kara influences Azrael isn't necessarily manipulative, in my opinion, but is definitely assertive. Azrael fundamentally wants to help monsterkind and break the barrier, just like Kara, but only Kara is determined enough, both literally and metaphorically, to make that happen. By becoming a fusion of a human and monster, their relationship is crystallized as one of mutual love for each other and their family, but one that will wreak havoc on anyone else. However, despite their massive power fueled by the mixture of love and hatred, they are unable to overcome each other's will. This is seen as a tragedy within Undertale's world. If only one listened to the other more, then they would have either been safe or freed the monsters. However, I think it's honestly beautiful. It shows that you can't always force someone to do something just because you care deeply about each other. It shows Azrael always going along with Kara's ideas and plans, finally standing up for what he believes in. And most importantly, it sets up this battle of ideology for the rest of the game. Undertale, partly, is about not compromising your beliefs, remaining determined in the face of difficulty. To even see Azrael and Kara in their somewhat complete forms, you have to be absolute in your mercy or violence respectively. By being paralyzed with an action, unable to make a decision one way or another, you get a neutral ending, a place where people aren't at their worst, but far from their best. This relationship is constantly hovering over Undertale's story. Simply put, the events of the story would not have happened without Kara and Asriel having the relationship they do. There is this void within the family itself where this relationship is missing, the love and care for each other sucked out. It's this unspoken grimness, almost like a curse, that no one feels comfortable addressing. The relationship that Flowey and dead Kara have, on the other hand, is not the same as before, which makes sense considering Asriel's little flowery journey has kind of fucked him up. We see most of this in the No Mercy run, starting from when Flowey realizes that their old friend Kara has returned. It's a pretty bone-chilling conversation, honestly. Flowey, who is barely Asriel anymore after being transformed literally and metaphorically by his incalculable time as a soulless flower, is so excited to just go to mass murder with his bestie. No more relationship, folks. Through the run, Flowey is not adversarial like he is in the other routes. Why should he be? His best friend is here, and they get to have fun again. It's difficult to know how Kara would respond to this, but considering we show them through our actions of controlling Frisk that it is right to kill or be killed, going further than just defending and instead seeking out violence, we can assume that this at least confirms Kara's philosophy. Additionally, the relationship between Flowey and Ghost Kara, twisted from the original sibling bond they had, makes sense for the evolution of Kara's perspective. Kara, while alive, would probably not have thought about exhausting all options and becoming stronger. It's only from Flowey giving them this idea of playing with the lives of others and turning to absolute annihilation as a way to get all material out of the game that Kara evolves in this way. It's a really neat way to make our course of actions diegetic in a way, by showing through Kara and Flowey's relationship why and how something like this could happen. This relationship reaches its natural conclusion at the end of the No Mercy route, where Flowey, like Asriel, has been going along with whatever Kara wants and their plan. There's an interesting comparison to be made with the ending of the True Pacifist run here. Asriel in that ending acts like the player character is Kara, but eventually has to accept that they're Frisk. Likewise, the No Mercy run ends with Flowey realizing that who they identified as Kara might be a little bit more than that, and a few moments too late. Although Kara was somewhat responsible for what happened to Asriel, it would have been impossible if he didn't agree to it at all. Their relationship is defined by love. The Kara that Asriel knows and that Flowey thinks he knows would never turn on him, his best friend. Unfortunately, our actions bringing Kara this far has fully realized the kill or be killed mentality, and Flowey is yet another monster in our way to get EXP out of. Kara's ideology mixing with our view of the game spells the end for Flowey, and we don't even get to choose what happens. Flowey is killed, and Kara is finally alone with us. The whole picture has been captured, and now the time for analysis begins in earnest. Kara and Asriel affect the game in many ways, despite both being in various states of death, and their relationship is what allows, if not forces, these traits of theirs to evolve and express themselves across the past and present of Undertale. The void within Undertale, with Asriel and Kara missing and being in this state of pseudo-existence, trapped in the minds and hearts of people who may prefer to forget, yet seem unable to, is vital to the core of Undertale itself. So, where does the void come from for Asriel? Well, as you may have picked up so far, it's Flowey. Asriel does haunt the narrative despite being technically alive, because Flowey is, to be a little rude, a fucked up abomination that came back wrong. Flowey's, that is Asriel's, actions before the game set up the power struggle, for lack of a better term, between Flowey and not just you, but the narrative as a whole. It sets up the themes of determination, of the distance one gains from reality by killing and loses by loving, and of punishment and redemption. Flowey is almost like a ghost, an incomplete and failed imitation of what Asriel once was, and has to live with that. It drives him crazy that he can't feel what he wants, and he grows more and more distant as he reckons with this injustice. Asriel coming back, even for a moment at the end of the True Pacifist route, is this weird combination of beautiful and terrifying, because the ghost that has touched the lives and essence of every one and thing in the underground, with Flowey standing in as a grim reminder of it the whole time, is now here. Asriel haunting the narrative in the specific way that he does gives us the proper amount of fear for this moment, for it to land with the desired emphasis. Asriel's care and love are missing from the game, replaced with a grim fascination with the torture of others, which makes your decision to choose mercy all the more impactful. Kara haunts the narrative in a very different way to Asriel. While Asriel's presence is remembered fondly and with complete love, Kara is almost forgotten in comparison. Humans are hated in the underground, and this likely played a reason in Kara being left by the wayside compared to Asriel. Instead, Kara is straight up missing from Undertale in a very odd way. We only really learn about them as a character in the True Pacifist route. Instead, we're led to believe that Kara is us, as they share the name that we give at the start. Despite everything though, Kara asserts themselves within the game, whether we like it or not. Even if you don't buy the Narakara theory, Kara is very obviously still in the game, notably at the end of the No Mercy run. However, what I said earlier of this section being the only things we can be sure about, is that even true? See, as I've talked about in the past, Kara isn't just a character in Undertale. They're also meant to be a kind of stand-in for the player, or at least some kind of weird in-between. They at least partially represent the aforementioned philosophy. Essentially, Kara is this pseudo-character which highlights the feeling of ghostliness even further. We are the ones bringing Kara back from the dead, and they are inextricably tied to us. The things we don't get to see about Kara is what makes them so alluring from an analytical lens, because of their very nature of being an inherently paradoxical combination of an entity for us to personally engage with the game as, and as a character in their own world. Kara feels almost separate from the game, as if cut out of the story by their own actions as well as ours. Kara was, and perhaps should have been, left behind in the past, just like Asriel alongside the philosophy they end up personifying. However, instead of being brought back by the actions of characters within the world that we then have to deal with, like Flowey, Kara is brought back by us, and the characters within the world have to deal with that. Kara haunts us in a much more significant way than Asriel ever does. The previous mentioned relationships between the two of them also highlights this void within the game. I mentioned the fact that this relationship is missing and has been replaced by a pale imitation warped by time and hatred earlier, but there's more to it than just that. Throughout the True Pacifist route, we ourselves form a relationship with Flowey, a dark mirror of both Asriel and Kara, and that relationship evolves. We, or Frisk technically, unknowingly fill the void that Kara has left in both the routes through our relationship with not just Asriel/Flowey, but the rest of the characters too. Some could say that this just applies to the No Mercy route, where we manifest Kara out of our philosophy and the violence that comes from it, but I believe after what we've talked about today that it applies to the True Pacifist route just as much. Of course, being another human that is adopted by Toriel is a very literal way of helping fill the void Kara left, but that's only part of the picture. Although we did not replace Kara, as Asriel himself states, we allow Asriel to move on from his connection with Kara and allow him to accept his own situation and fate at the same time. In our own way too, we allow Kara to move on as well. No longer is their relationship forced to be kept alive through denial and obsession, and by helping Asriel and freeing the monsters from the underground, we ultimately fulfill Kara's true goal, at least the one they had while they were alive. The reason the relationship between Asriel and Kara, regardless of time, works so well is because it hangs over our head for the whole game, whether we want it to or not, and shows us the core point that we need to resolve if we are to truly make things better for those we have learned to love along our journey. That brings me to the point of the void. This whole time I've been giving examples of where and why this void exists, talking about what it tells us about Undertale's world and the characters within. However, I want to propose to you all watching, how is the void used thematically? As in, what themes does it tie into and affect? We've talked about how it brings ideas such as determination, love, and philosophy to the forefront of the story via Flowey and Kara, but those themes mostly use the void as a vehicle to do so, drawing on it from a narrative story lens rather than thematic weight. From what I've mentioned so far, there is one theme, one that is rarely mentioned when it comes to Undertale, that it all circles back to, and that theme is grief. Now, the idea that the void left by two dead children might have something to do with the theme of grief probably didn't need a 4,000 word essay before it to convince you all, but I hope it did. The thing is, no matter how you look at it, this void is one that is both a literal and a metaphorical representation of how different people engage with grief. Asriel's void, that is Flowey, is a classic manifestation of something coming back wrong, someone brought back against their will even though they had died. Everyone suffers for this decision, most notably Asriel himself. There is something to be said about the way that desperately clinging onto the past without processing their emotions healthily can cause damage to themselves and everyone around them, and this is seen in Kara's void as well, specifically in the way that Flowey and Asriel engage with it. Asriel misses Kara so much in the time that he's alive again, but as previously mentioned, it takes him a while to realize that what he's doing isn't okay. Much like how real people grieve for someone who has left their life in whatever way, he projects all of his desires and personalities of his sibling onto us, or more appropriately, onto Frisk, in order to try to relive those moments, to capture what was robbed from him. Asgore's decision to wage war on humanity by taking 7 human souls is precisely his own grief and rage at losing his children screaming out, though in truth he too wants to simply live as a happy family again, not worried about declaring war on the surface. Toriel acts in a similar way, trying to keep everything in a state of stasis, where everyone can be happy as long as they don't accept the reality of their situation. She grieves for the children she lost by taking in those who fall into the underground like she did with Kara, invariably letting them go but never going with them. Denial, which turns to anger and bargaining, but through your actions you eventually dispel the ghosts that live inside them and allow them to accept their situation. Ultimately, Asriel and Kara were both signs of hope. Hope of a better future, a future where monsters could live happily. However, too much burden was placed on these children, and their malcontent spirits were kept alive by the twisting of hope into violence and denial. It makes sense, of course. The monsters had little else but hope, so to cling onto that was somewhat natural, if not unfair to Asriel and Kara. Even we do it in our own way. Half the Undertale fanfictions written have been motivated by seeing Asriel and Kara happy again, so deeply desiring the love and time and happiness that even we feel robbed of. We are, after all, the ones that bring Asriel and Kara back in a form, and the ways in which these manifest tell us all we need to know. Asriel is brought back by love and acceptance, by trusting in others and the future at the end of the True Pacifist run, and I like to believe that Kara is there with us too. The key point, though, is that we leave them behind to go into a new world, a new path forward. The No Mercy route, where we destroy everything in our way, including Asriel, and bring forth Kara, simply amplifies the void more than anything else. This is not a happy ending for anyone, least of all those who the land grieves for. It's a barren wasteland, devoid of emotion. In a way, I suppose it is devoid of grief too. Perhaps, Toby says, you have to grieve. You have to feel. You have to reckon with the pain and agony of all of it and still remain strong, still come out the other side. You have to stay determined. When someone dies, you want to keep their memory alive. I personally think it's necessary to do so. Love transcends something like death, and by enshrining someone in your memory and in your heart, they can never truly die. I think Undertale shows us, however, that this task of remembrance is not only a necessity, but also a responsibility. It's important to remember those who have touched your life and respect their impact, but you also have to allow yourself to move on and open yourself up to other things, other people, other ideas. If someone or something meant the world to you, you do need to keep it with you, but you also need to be sure to not let that grief consume you. I grieve for the time when I first played Undertale, but the game itself taught me that I cannot clutch onto the unreasonable hope of ever having that time again. I grieve for so much that I have lost over the years, and that feeling never really goes away. But Kara and Asriel and the lessons they learn tell us we can't stay stuck in the past. We can't let ourselves be haunted by the void of that which has left us behind. We have to move on. And I hope that anyone watching knows that, although the parting hurts, there'll always be something new waiting on the horizon. And here we are at the end. I hope you all enjoyed the video. This took a bit of a turn that I didn't fully expect when beginning this script, but hey, that's pretty much true of all my videos. I know I'm quite late to the anniversary, but I wanted to put this out regardless since I think it's an interesting idea and pretty enjoyable one for me to talk about. I always find it a little difficult talking about Kara, but I think that between this and the protagonism video, I've done alright. Keep an eye out for some other Kara videos coming out from the community. I've heard there's a very good one in the works. Remember how in the last video I mentioned there was going to be a big Deltarune video next up? Yeah, well obviously this isn't it. I decided to save that one for two reasons. One, it wasn't really done since it was taking a hell of a long time, and two, I wanted to have a bit of a run up to it vis-a-vis Deltarune content. I do have a plan to fill the gap between videos while I work on the big project, but well, I'll keep you posted on that. Regardless, thank you for watching as always. A massive thank you to my patrons Michael Bates, Mickey, Zalgo, Tybee Fitzhugh and Nigel Robinson for your continued lovely support. If you have any other suggestions for videos or opinions on Undertale or Deltarune, let me know in the comments. I have some big plans coming up for the rest of the year, so I hope you'll come along on this adventure with me. Until next time, I've been Viva Veritas, and I'll see you again soon.